Hello. I want to ask about Leadbeater's possums and where we're currently at with them, you might be surprised about. So, critically endangered, recognised as one of the 10 most at-risk species in the entire world. We had the consultation document on listing eligibility and conservation actions, which was released a few months ago and was out for consultation. That was correct? Yes?
Yes, Senator. Jeff Richardson, Assistant Secretary, Protected Species and Communities Branch. Yes, the reassessment by the Threatened Species Scientific Committee was released for public comment some months back.
And that's considered, and that recommendation was that Leadbeater was eligible for critically endangered status.
That was their proposed conclusion, Senator, and the purpose of the public comment, of course, was to gain further information that could inform the assessment. Okay,
and so the consultation, the request for submissions closed on the 16th of August?
That's correct, Senator.
Right, so 2 months ago now. How long until the listing assessment of Leadbeater is expected to be completed?
Senator, the date for the listing assessment was in fact extended in late August, early September. I couldn't get you the exact date on notice, at the request of the Threatened Species Scientific Committee, and that was to be able to properly take account of the comments that were received through that public comment process. So the original deadline for the assessment to be completed and provided to the Minister for consideration was the 30th of September, and that the committee sought and the Minister granted an extension to that deadline until the end of March.
So March
2019.
2019, and originally the timeline for this assessment was March 2018?
That's correct, Senator.
So we've lost another year of assessing whether the Leadbeater's is accepted as being critically endangered.
That's correct, Senator. So the species remains critically endangered while the assessment continues.
And how about the timeline on the recovery plan then?
So again, Senator, the Minister, when then Minister Frydenberg granted the first assessment till the end of September, asked for the information gained through the assessment to be considered by the committee as to whether it would affect the proposed recovery plan that they had considered some months before that.
So the finalisation of the recovery plan has been pushed out too, along with that?
That's correct,
assessment.
Senator. So the finalisation of the recovery plan is to take account, the committee needs to reconsider the recovery plan in light of the information gained through the reassessment process, which is a considerable amount of new information.
So can I recap? 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, in April 2015, then Environment Minister Hunt accepted the recommendation of the Threatened Species Scientific Committee that that the Leadbeater should be upgraded to critically endangered. And then in July 2015, it was identified as a species that required emergency action and was going to have an accelerated time frame of a year for a recovery plan to be developed and implemented.
That's correct, Senator.
That's correct. So that was July 2015, 3 years ago. And then basically because of a nomination to downlist it by the Australian Forest Products Association, we have had this delay now of 3 years. So they've been able to play interference in critical actions to protect this critically endangered species. It is recognised as being one of the most endangered species in the world, and because of a submission from the Australian Forest Products Association based on non-peer-reviewed so-called science, we have had this huge delay, and we're not expected to then get a recovery plan now until next year.
Senator, if I can just mention a couple of things, which I think Mr. Richardson's already pointed out. The species is currently listed as critically endangered. It remains listed as critically endangered. That's in place, as well as the conservation advice, which guides the practices to ensure the viability of the species, remains in place. What we're talking about is a review of whether that same level of endangerment continues and whether any of the recovery tools, such as the recovery plan, need to be updated.
But the recovery plan is enforceable. Conservation advice is not. It's a recovery plan that was recommended to be accelerated, so it was in place by 2016. It's now going to be 3 years, and meanwhile the logging continues. Meanwhile the logging of their habitat and impacts of that forestry activity continues because of unsound, non-peer-reviewed so-called science from the very industry that is profiting from their they're absolutely declined towards extinction.
Senator, two things very quickly. Number one is conservation advice absolutely is taken into account when we consider any approvals for projects that relate in this area. Number two is that the scientific committee is incredibly robust in their analysis. If there is information that is not scientifically robust, that will not meet the test.
Yes, but I'm talking about the delay. And I mean, this is just appalling. This is just a case study in the complete failure of our environment laws, in that you have this critically endangered species that is recommended to have an accelerated recovery plan 3 years ago. It still does not have the legal protections from that recovery plan 3 years later, and we've got further delays now beyond what we have been told. Every 6 months there are further delays in giving it the legal status of having a legally enforceable recovery plan.
Can I just seek a clarification from you, Senator Rice? Are you suggesting that the current actions that are in place in relation to this species are in some way not being enforced? Disregarding the legality of the status of the document, etc., are you suggesting that the recovery plan actions are not being undertaken?
I'm suggesting that it is what is likely is that when we've had the final recommendations from the Threatened Species Scientific Committee, and that when the Leadbeater's possum, as is almost certain, will maintain its status of being critically endangered.
Well, you don't know that, and I don't know that, so let's stick to the facts.
That there are likely to be more stringent requirements on logging activity to further protect this critically endangered species.
You're making a quantum leap in assumption there, but can we go back to my question that I asked you?
It's a precautionary principle that is why I'm making these leaps, because I know that the logging activity activity, yes, well, the science up until now has shown that. That's why it's critically endangered.
Okay, so we're just having an argument about whose science is right here, I would suggest.
No, we're not. We're talking about the advice from the Threatened Species Scientific Committee, which their recommendation is that it should be maintained as critically endangered because of the threats to its existence, and with the key threat being the activities of clearfield logging.
Well, that's actually not correct, and you know that's not correct. But back to my original statement, are you saying that the processes in terms of the recovery plan that is in place for this critically endangered, or listed as critically endangered species, are not being implemented? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that that we have had a delay, and that the application of much more, what is likely to be more stringent restrictions
is likely to be more stringent.
Yes, and because of the precautionary principle, and because we have had this massive delay, that's why it is important. I mean, because of there is a likelihood that there will be more stringent restrictions on the activities of clearfield logging in Leadbeater's possum habitat, and we have had 3 years of delay because of the actions of the Forest Products Association being able to play interference in finalising appropriate actions to protect the Leadbeater's possum.
Yeah, well,
I don't think there's any point in going any further. It's an absolute disgrace and shows how our environment laws are completely failing our threatened species.
Okay, well, I would like to put on the record after your outburst to say that I completely and utterly reject the premise of your comments.
I just wonder whether Minister and Senator Rice, as I break my pen,